The end of Oz Chapter 6. Somehow the mask actually moved with her mouth, as if it was part of her, as if it was her real face. The three of us exchanged glances. Who was this chick? Langwierder's inexplicably disguised secretary? Was her mission to slay us with rudeness? I looked down at my glittering boots, wiggling my toes. Madison fidgeted. Only Knox stood straight and still, looking calmly ahead at nothing, as if all of this was perfectly ordinary. He'd grown up in Oz. Maybe for him it was. Finally, the woman reached the end of a column and set down her pen. Her hands were beautifully shaped with long, pale, slender fingers. She pushed back her heavy black hair before looking up at us. Behind the mask I caught a flash of extraordinary green eyes, gold-flecked like a cat's. "Well, well, well," she said. "Look what the Wheelers dragged in." The mask's silver mouth smiled sardonically. "We're citizens of Oz," Knox began. "We have no quarrel with your country. The road of yellow brick brought us to—" "Still lying through your teeth even after all these years?" the woman asked. "Of course you have quarrel with this country, Knox." She said his name like it was a curse word. Knox started. "How do you know who I am?" he asked cautiously. "Oh, Knox," she said, her voice like ice. "I know all about you. You might choose not to remember the past, but I don't forget anything." I looked at Knox, but his face was blank. I knew he was as confused as I was. He'd never been to Ev before. How could he have met this woman? Who on earth was she? The silver mouth opened wide, and she laughed, a cold, cruel laugh that sent a shiver down my spine. This was definitely not a secretary. I took a step forward. "Are you Princess Langwierder?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "I'm Amy Gum. I'm with Knox and, my friend Madison, and we didn't mean to disturb you at all. In fact, we could totally just, leave," I added brightly. Okay, so maybe I wasn't going to win any awards for diplomatic speeches, but still I didn't see a reason for this creepy chick to keep laughing at me. "You're the most recent conquest, I take it," she said, when she was done chuckling. "You know you're not the last in a very long line. Knox is quite the pretty boy, isn't he? Always an eye for the ladies. So troubled and remote. Only you can save him," she said mockingly. "Look," Knox said, his teeth gritted. Whoever she was, her barbs had landed. "I don't know who you are, but you should really think about—" "Oh, Knox," she said. "Has it been so long? Have you really forgotten me so easily?" Suddenly, lines began to appear in the sinister mask. One by one, silver sections peeled away from her face like petals of a flower unfurling. At each section opened, the silver disappeared in a puff of gleaming smoke. Underneath the mask, her face was ordinary, neither pretty nor plain, something in the middle, a face almost remarkable of how completely unremarkable it was. I had the feeling that if I glanced away from her, I'd immediately forget what she looked like. There was something almost uncanny about her ordinariness, something almost enchanted. But next to me, Knox breathed out hard with a noise of total shock. "Lana Dell?" He was staring at her, his mouth actually open. I'd never, in all the time I'd known him, seen him so astonished. I looked back and forth between the two of them. "Wait, you know her?" I asked. The air around her was charged with unmistakable naked hostility as she stared Knox down, and to my utter surprise, he looked away first, his cheeks flooding with color, as if he was embarrassed or ashamed. "Who I used to be doesn't matter anymore," the woman said. "But you're... Knox was still trying to get out a sentence. "Not dead? Not so lucky for you, I'm afraid." You weren't supposed to... survive?" She smiled. "I'm sorry to disappoint you, Knox. Listen, I don't know why the road coughed you up at my doorstep, but this is not a good time to rehash our past." She stood up and walked away from us, the silky robe clinging to her body. As with her face, there was something almost impossible to pin down about it. She wasn't tall, she wasn't short, she wasn't thin, she wasn't curvy. Somehow everything about her avoided description, as if her whole being was a disguise. "Why are you here?" she asked curtly. I took a deep breath. I had no idea how Knox knew this woman, and I wasn't entirely sure I wanted to. But I could tell that she was on the verge of doing something bad, to all of us, and I needed to get out of her palace in one piece. All of us. "We don't know," I said. "The truth is, Amy," Knox said, a warning note in his voice. I knew what he was hinting at. Telling this person everything might be incredibly stupid, especially if she was on the side of the Gnome King. But somehow I didn't think she was. The road had brought us here for a reason. Maybe it had meant for us to meet her. Besides, I was tired of the wicked way of doing things. "Knox, no more secrets," I said. I saw something flicker in Langwyader's eyes, something that could have been respect. "Like I said, we don't know why we're here. The road brought us across the deadly desert and dumped us." I quickly explained how we ended up running away from Oz, the road whisking us off. I didn't tell her everything, because that would have taken all day. But enough. She didn't say much while I explained, just stopped me a couple of times to ask more questions about the Gnome King. When I told her that the Gnome King and Glamora had killed Mombi, her eyes widened, but she didn't comment. Nox stayed quiet. It felt good to be the one making the decisions. And why shouldn't I? I'd been through as much as he had in the time since I'd met him. I'd trained like crazy and fought like a warrior. Nox wasn't in charge of me anymore. We were equals. When I was done talking, she was silent for a long time. Madison just sat down on the hard stone floor and rested her head on her knees. Despite her bravado, it was clear she was overwhelmed. I knew how she felt. And she didn't have the grandmotherly Gert to help her adjust like I had. I was tempted to join her. I was exhausted. We all were. But I stood my ground. "Lonadel," Nox said suddenly. "Langwyader, how did you get here? What are you doing here?" She walked to one of the narrow windows overlooking the wasteland outside. The mirrored walls refracted her every move as if we were in an amusement park funhouse. The effect was spooky and distracting. As she moved, it got harder and harder to pin down which image was her and which was her reflection. "After you and Mombi sent me here to spy, the Gnome King captured me," she said. She held up one slender wrist, and I saw a thin silver bracelet from which dangled a glittering ruby padlock and key. Wait a minute. This girl had been in the Order? What was going on? I stared at Nox, but he shook his head, warning me to stay quiet. Quiet was not exactly something I did well. "He interrogated me for information about the Order," she continued. Her voice was steady. But I thought about what I'd seen of interrogations in Dorothy's palace and shuddered. "When he had what he wanted, he turned me into a spy." "You work for the Gnome King?" I interrupted. If that was the case, we were in trouble. She shrugged. "I stay alive. For now, that means keeping him happy." "Does he know we're here?" Nox asked. "Well, I haven't told him," she said. "But I wouldn't have to. And if he's as connected to the magic of Ev as you are to Oz, if the road brought you here, he probably felt it." "So we're not safe here?" Madison asked from the floor, lifting her head. Langwyader glanced at her and smiled without warmth. "In these times, you're not safe anywhere." Madison stood up and glared at her. "Okay, fine. Then can you just kill us now? Because I'm pretty tired, and I'm pretty sick of listening to people talk." For the first time since she'd taken her mask off, Langwyader looked startled, and then she started to laugh. This time there was nothing cruel about it. It was the laughter of a much younger and more innocent girl. Maybe the person she had once been, before the Gnome King got her. I was starting to feel sorry for her. Almost. "You can rest here," she said. "For now, at least." She glanced at Nox, her eyes hardening again. "Until I decide what to do with you." "So you're keeping us prisoner?" Nox asked. "I'm entertaining you as my honored guests," she smiled mirthlessly. She'd said honored like it was a curse. "These are strange times," she added, looking out the window again. "You're the second visitors we'd had from Oz in a matter of days. The Gnome King's up to something, and I want to know what it is." "The second visitors from Oz?" I asked. She turned back at us and raised an eyebrow. "You mean you don't know?" "Know what?" Nox asked. "Dorothy's here." she said. Knox and I looked at each other and then back at her. Dorothy's alive? Very much so, I'm afraid, she shrugged. Until I kill her, that is.